Thank you again, everyone, for joining. We're very honored and grateful to Dr. Ebeid for joining us.
Oh, you did.
Dr. Ahmed Ebeid is the son of a United Nations interpreter, experiencing the world from a young age. After receiving his medical degree in Cairo, Ahmed returned to America to continue his professional training. He acquired his residency in Illinois Masonic Medical Center in Chicago and 2 specialty fellowships, pain management from Stanford University and pediatric anesthesia from the University of Michigan. After working in private practice on the East Coast for several years, he moved to Oregon in 2008 to run his own clinic for more than 10 years. Dr. Ebeid is a strong advocate of humanitarian relief efforts and has traveled on medical missions whenever possible in the last 15 years. Missions have taken him to Uganda, Yemen, Guatemala, and several times to Gaza. His last 2 missions to Gaza were during the current genocide. Ahmed shares his life with his wife Noura and their 3 children, Taha, Yasin, and Misk, and daughter-in-law Aya. Coming from a large extended family, Ahmed is always looking forward to hosting and visiting family. Ahmed and his family foster children and host refugees arriving to Portland from time to time. PAC is grateful and honored to have him join us here today.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. The pleasure of mine to be here. Jazakallah khair for the introduction.
Am I loud enough in the back? Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Do you need the mic for recording?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, due to the live.
We use this slide mostly for the non-Muslim crowd, but it's always a good reminder about the history of Palestine and the little bit of history of the background behind the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So in the 1920s, if you go back that far, there was no such thing as the state of Israel, and the Jewish population was only a small amount of the Palestinian land. The British ruled in the 1920s under the British occupation to the big swaths of the Middle East, and the Jewish population grew, and at that point they owned about 7% of the land, which is what's now Israel and Palestine. Under the British during World War I, they were trying to broker the start of State of Israel, and this happened after the Jews were prosecuted in Germany during World War I. And they, through the United Nations, came up with this idea to split the land of Palestine between the Jewish population and the non-Jewish population. So they came up with a plan to give 53% to the Jewish population. This was in 1947. So even though they only owned about 7%, the plan is to give them 53%. So that plan was rejected by the Arab countries at the time, including the Palestinians, for obvious reasons. And then in 1948, there was the famous 1948 war, which the Jewish settlers from Europe came into what's now Palestinian. They were armed by the British and the rest of the Europeans by the time, and launched the war. And at the end of the war in 1949, they were able to control almost the entire what's the land is of Palestine is now, leaving the West Bank under the Jordanian rule and leaving Gaza under the Egyptian rule. Since then, from 1949 to now, to the other map here, this is land control and population and forced exile numbers. So you got 1946, 1967, there was another war, and you could see the black as the expansion of the Israeli control over land and the expulsion of people. As of today, there is about 5.5 million people, million Palestinians who are still considered displaced and refugees in other area. This is not counting the new displacements from Gaza. Any questions about that at all? So during the 70, 80 years that Israel existed now, they had several policies that they used to basically expand their control over land and expel the Palestinian population. So land confiscation was the obvious one. They just go in and take the land and declare it theirs and displace the people. And then movement restrictions, so they go all the way around the Palestinian villages and restrict people from moving. So that village kind of gets smaller and smaller over time until they expel everybody. Forcible transfer of land, preventing the Palestinians from ever building on their land and trying to confiscate it. Denial of residential rights. Once they take over the land, they don't give the Palestinian any of their civil rights that is given to their if they're equal citizens, though there's no equal citizens, and then they suspend their civil rights. So one of the things that is staggering is that they have a road system. The car license plates are color coded if you're Jewish or if you're not Jewish, and if you're Jewish, you have access to the entire road system, and if you're not Jewish, then you don't have access to the road system. You have certain roads that you can only drive on, and they're color coded. And then the map on the other side there puts the checkpoints to enforce this kind of segregation. So you have, in our terms here, would be a checkpoint every other block, basically, or every entrance to the freeway and exit to the freeway to enforce this no non-Jews on certain roads, and also to enforce the restriction of movement on the Palestinians. So all these burdens were added to the Palestinian population over years. In Gaza specifically, since 2004, when Hamas won an election and became the governing body in Gaza, Israel put a blockade on Gaza, basically isolating it from the rest of the world. So Gaza is a small strip, and it's bordered by Israel from every angle except that south border, which borders Egypt and then the sea. And Israeli effectively put a blockade in place, whether it's land, air, or sea, preventing movement of people, movement of goods, except anything authorized by the Israelis. And the Egyptians, as part of an agreement that was made at the time, even though they control the border, had to get Israeli authorization for movement of people and goods and everything else that goes in and out. Additionally, Gaza was subjected to Israeli military assaults multiple times, so in 2008, 2012, and 2014, 21, and then 23. So every couple of years, give or take, there was a break between 2014 and 2021, but they have repeatedly have military assaults on Gaza. This year, this number is a little bit off. We're not day 190. We're day probably 200 something. But these numbers were from day 140. The number of casualties, the number of displaced people, the number of homes. These are staggering figures. 2 million people, which is about 90% of the Gaza population is now homeless. The number of deaths is now higher than 60,000. The number of injured is more than 100,000. And these are numbers that are counted. So there is, about 60,000 people that were counted dead. There's a bunch more that are not counted for mass graves and underneath the rubbles. The people that disappeared, whether they're arrested by the Israelis, apprehended by the Israelis, or whether they're dead, it's unknown. So the actual numbers are actually a lot more than the counted numbers, and these numbers are going to continue to rise every day. The military assault is going on. So what do I do when I go to Gaza, which is the focus of our talk today? A little bit of storytelling about my journey in Gaza. Preparing for Gaza, the first time around maybe a little bit harder than the second time around, but it's a decision that involves the whole family. My mom lives with us, and she was very worried about the potential of me going to Gaza, my wife and my kids. And we had to start conversations about, what happens if I do go and I don't come back. And the idea of life and death could happen at any time. It doesn't matter if I'm here or if I'm in Gaza. But as a family, we had to be more aware and more conscious of are we prepared to handle, is my family prepared to handle life without me afterwards? So these were conversations that we had to have as a family, and they were very difficult ones, but they were also eye-opening. And I get a lot of these questions, aren't you scared of going into a war zone? And life and death is not the scary part, because I believe that we're all going to die at the same time, regardless of where we are. So if I'm going to die anyway, dying in Gaza is a better way to die from a spiritual standpoint. But the bigger test, the scary part for me is coming back without a limb. If I come back without an arm and a leg, that would be a bigger test for me. It would be a bigger struggle I would have to face. Alhamdulillah, if it's Allah's will, it is. But that's more scary for me than life and death. My wife was very supportive of the decision. She had to overcome her internal fears about me going and believe in the bigger picture that there is a greater cause and people go to Gaza. And as individuals, we don't have a lot that we can do in the big stream of things. So when an opportunity arises to do something, then it's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us that there is such an opportunity that we can participate. So we started planning, and our instructions is to be self-sufficient. So when you go there, we have to pack everything you need while you're there, whether it's your sleeping bag, your pillow, your food, your clean water filters, candy to distribute to the kids over there. We take everything that can fit in a bag and that we can think we'll need during the time there. A lot of people try to help by saying, okay, can we send stuff with you? Whether it's medical supplies, whether it's clothes, whether it's whatever. So for me, I prioritize the medical supplies, and people would actually deliver medical supplies to my home, and we would try to pack these and take a few extra bags of medical supplies. And then we would show up at the airport with a bunch of bags. I was traveling Turkish Airlines, and they were the worst. They charged an arm and a leg for every extra bag, and then after I got to the gate, they said my backpack and my carry-on were too big, and they would charge me even more. And that's when I flipped out on them, and they didn't charge more at that time. But anyway. And then the team meets in Cairo. So these are all physicians from the United States, and actually what this gentleman is from Jordan, but the meeting place is in Cairo, and a lot of us don't know each other. Most of us don't know each other beforehand. So Cairo is the meet and greet spot. We get to know each other. We spend the night in Cairo. We load all our luggage into these vans. This is the organization that I went with the second time around, Palestinian American Bridge. And this was our team. So Dr. Farhan Abdulaziz, the first one from the right, is an emergency room doc. He lives in Dallas, Texas. But he also is a part-time Islamic scholar, so he actually gives a lot of lectures from an Islamic education standpoint, and he's well known with Maghrib Institute, for those of us who know him. And we'll see a little bit, but we formed a small group that went up to a hospital in the north, and he was on that group, and it was great. Dr. Amjad is a surgeon from Canada. He's a general thoracic surgeon. Sam is an orthopedic surgeon from Chicago. Khalid is an ICU doc from Massachusetts. The middle person is Dr. Akram. He's the team lead, he's the organizer, the founder of TAB. He lives in Houston. Dr. Abdullah is a neurosurgeon, lives in Chicago. I'm blanking on his name actually for a second. He's a urologist from Chicago as well, myself, and then a neurosurgeon from Jordan. So after we meet in Cairo and we load up the buses and we start this journey in the van. I'm gonna get back to this. Okay, I think we're missing the picture. We have a convoy of vans that travels together under the umbrella of the United Nations, the World Health Organization. So all the organizations that have medical teams going into Gaza and crossing the border coordinate with the WHO, with the World Health Organization. They get all their clearances ahead of time to pass the border. Then we meet at a meeting point in Cairo, and the whole convoy, we had about 14 of these vans, drive together from Cairo all the way to Rafah. As we get closer to the border, one of the things that we all hear about is the trucks that are parked full of different aid or just goods that are waiting to go into Rafah and are being prevented access by the Egyptians under the order of the Israelis. So you see those on this video, and you see no.
هنخش لحد حته معينه بس وبعدين نبدا نخطيها بقى بس انت مش هنعدي الناحيه الثانيه.
So you can see these just miles and miles of trucks parked. And when you hear about it, you say, oh, all these trucks are waiting. But when you see these really long lines of trucks, all of them having goods, it's a heartbreaking sight. And then you see some of the goods that are just been, unloaded and abandoned, basically because they didn't get their turns to go across, and it's a heartbreaking sight to see that all this merchandise and food and clothes and medicine is just sitting there, and then only a couple of miles down the road, people are dying from lack of supplies, whether it's food or medicine or everything else. At the border itself, the border crossing is one side of it is controlled by the Egyptians. Theoretically, Israel has full control over it. The other side is the Palestinian Authority controlling the Palestinian border. So we unload all the stuff on one side. There are manpower there that help take it through X-ray checks, and then they load it on buses, and then these buses travel to the other side, and we unload on the Palestinian side. And then as individuals, we have to go through the passport clearance and intelligence clearance on both the Egyptian and the Palestinian side. So we spend usually 3 to 4 hours in the holds just waiting for the passports to clear, and then we take the bus to the other side, and then that's when we start getting into Gaza. And then on the other side of Gaza, other side of Gaza, then you see that's the wall separating Gaza from Egypt. So literally across this wall is where all the goods are waiting, and inside is where all the people are struggling through the life in Rafah. The video that didn't load showed all the tents across this wall between Egypt and Gaza. What this gentleman is doing here, digging a hole, is he's making a makeshift bathroom. So they dig these holes in the ground and then put 4 pieces of tarp around it, and that becomes the bathroom for the neighborhood of tents. And then when the hole gets full, it gets buried, and you move the tarp a little bit further around and dig another hole for the next bathroom. But that also creates, a massive amount of untreated sewage, and you smell it, you see it, it contaminates the well water, which is all dependent on well water. So it's creating a massive contamination issue with the water. A little bit of background. Gaza is 25. Rafah is 25 square kilometers, so smaller than Patterson. And now it used to have about 300,000 people. What's the population of Patterson? Anybody know?
160, 160,000.
160,000. Okay. So Gaza is smaller than Patterson in size and had about 300,000 before the war. And then now it has about 1.8 million people there because of all the displaced people. So you can imagine 2 million people living in Patterson, what would it look like? For those of us who went to Hajj, you find 2 million people at Hajj, and Mecca's square kilometer is about 500 square kilometers when you count Mecca, Arafat, the entire area that the people use for Hajj is about 500 square kilometers. And if you imagine the crowds there, you can only imagine what it's like in Rafah. So everything is a crowd, whether it's the bakery shop, whether it's the ATM machine, whether it's you're trying to buy groceries or goods or whatever is left in there in the market that you can buy. Everything is just crowded. The amount of people there is incredible with the amount of land that's left. On this side is a tent over the rubble of a house. So the house was bombed down, and the occupants of the house put a tent there and over the rubbles and started living in it. The hospitals there are overwhelmed, not just with injuries. They're overwhelmed with injuries and sick people, but they're also overwhelmed by people trying to take shelter in the hospitals. So here we're going to see a hospital corridor with all the makeshift tents in the corridor. So all these tarps are basically isolating different sleeping compartments, and you have entire families behind these little makeshift, tarp walls. For us, the hospital administrations tried to give us a room in the hospital to transform into a sleeping compartment. So whichever room that is not used for patient care, they try to use for hosting the visiting docs. So this happened to be an administrative office, what used to be the office of the manager of the hospital, and this is in a different hospital, just kind of sleep wherever they can find a room to host us. The healthcare system in Gaza has always been struggling to cope with the amount of people using the services. So before the war, every hospital would have limited supplies because of the blockade. It also would have a lot more patients than it's designed to handle, and that's pre-war. So a lot of the equipment that existed pre-war was also run down, and there was maintenance issues and issues getting parts and stuff like that. Magnify that by now that 80% of the actually 90% now of the hospitals have been damaged and out of service. So you only have 10% of the hospital servicing the entire population, and you can imagine what that looks like. These are some injury related. So this is a bullet fragment coming out from somebody's brain. This is an entire bullet coming out from a child. These are some of the injuries and working conditions in the hospitals. I was able to go to Gaza twice during this war. The first time we stayed mostly in the southern area in a hospital called the Gaza European Hospital, which is in Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is the next town over when you're traveling south to north. So Rafah is the southernmost that borders Egypt. Then you get Khan Yunis, and that's where the European hospital is. And then you get central Gaza, and then you get the northern Gaza. So in January, anything beyond the central Gaza was inaccessible to any international teams. They were not allowing anybody in. So we stayed, every mission that was going to Gaza stayed in the south. When I went back in March, I was among the first group of medical teams that were allowed to go north. So we were able to get to the north in an area called Jabalia, which is even north of Gaza City. Gaza City would be kind of in the middle of Gaza. And then you get to Jabalia, and there's a hospital there called Kamal al-Adwan, and that's where we're able to get to the north. So in Rafah, there is still evidence of war. There's still damaged buildings, there's the overcrowding, there's the population, there's the injuries. In the north, it's a different story. In the north, is complete devastation because of the Israeli strategies. They went in, they completely destroyed every standing building, every standing tree. Complete farmlands were destroyed. Even the cemeteries were attacked and some of the bodies digged up. So it's just complete destruction. We're going to start seeing some pictures here once we get over our technical difficulties. The journey north had to be obviously heavily coordinated with the United Nations and the Israelis. So we go from south to north in United Nations vehicles that are armored. They give us bulletproof vests and hats and making progress. So in the journey in the car, taking pictures. So this is from inside the car, just driving, and the camera moving from one side of the car to the other, and you can see that there's just not a single standing building left. There is an Israeli checkpoint right in the middle that isolates the south from the north. So getting closer to the Israeli checkpoint, obviously it's all coordinated. You have to call in for permission to approach, and then there's this waiting area where you wait there until you have the permission to approach. And then you go into this no man zone, which is enforced by snipers and helicopters and drones and everything. So we saw a corpse on the road. So even if the family knew they were there, they would have no way to approach to get the corpse out because they would be shot at. So, obviously nobody knows why there would be somebody trying to walk there, but whoever it is shot and just left there in the streets. Once we get to the Israeli checkpoint, there is this system that they have in place. This gentleman here is our security officer from the United Nations. He's the only one that leaves the cars. He takes the passports, walks over until they tell him to stop, throws the passports on the ground, walks back. The Israeli soldier will come, he'll retrieve the passports, take it back to their hut, to their checkpoint, and then they radio in or call or whatever for the clearances, and then when that happens, then we move on. On the way back, they had upgraded the system a little bit where the passports are dropped on a concrete rock rather than on the floor, but it was the same kind of exchange. Nobody leaves the cars, one person takes all the passports, goes and comes back and get the clearance. This was a video from the United Nations they posted about the mission because it was their first mission moving through the south to the north, so they advertised it as one of their success missions. So this is about a 2-minute video that I'll just play for a second.
You will be looking they stay here with you. Therefore, okay, the surgeon occupy these two anesthesiologists and emergency doctor. They will be part of your team. And here we are. We finally bring them here. Okay, so they are going to stay here for 2 weeks, actually. And then we are already organizing the next rotation.
We are so delighted for the efforts to bring an excellent team here for the people here.
Today we drove from the south to the north with complete ruins all through the road. There's no building that's left intact. The working conditions for the medical staff here is very hard. They are working without support, so they're working tirelessly, they're exhausted, very limited supplies. They have to be more like magicians than doctors, trying to figure out how to help the patients with whatever they have. It's a very, very hard situation.
The people here are absolutely amazing, and they're worth if we could save one life, we can make a difference for one child. If we can get one child transferred out of here to an outside country to get the care he needs for a limb reconstruction or rehab for amputation, it's worth it. We all have to do our part.
Okay. Today we went again to Kamal Hospital in North Gaza. We successfully deployed an international emergency medical team that will support the hospital for the next weeks. Additionally, we also referred one critical patient affected by cystic fibrosis from Kamal Adwan here to IMC Field Hospital in Rafah, together with the caretaker and the rest of the family. And in the next few days, we will also coordinate for the international medical evacuation abroad.
It was a pretty heavy mission, but we are really happy that it was successful. We already could evacuate 2 patients last Saturday, and we hope that we can proceed like this because there are many, many, many more people that urgently need better medical care.
So this was on a Thursday, so he said that they evacuated 2 people Saturday before. We went on a Thursday, they took 2 more patients, so 4 patients in a week and a half. And then for the next 2 weeks, there were no more evacuations. There was no clearance for any further evacuation. I don't know how many are evacuated after that, but it's a very small number compared to the number of patients that need evacuation.
These are UNRWA cars or WHO cars? The UN cars?
Yeah.
Belong to UNRWA
Belong to the WHO.
only? No UNRWA?
So, UNRWA cars, so UNRWA in the north have, you'll see some pictures, have all been destroyed, whether they're warehouses or buildings and stuff like that. We'll see some pictures we've done. They are still operating in the south to some degree. They still have some warehouses there. They still have the food coupon, mechanism. They're still getting some of these trucks. So in the south, they're still present. And, even before the war, they estimated 60% of the population was reliant on UNRWA for food. So now it's even worse. But the need obviously is much more than they can handle. So these are some of the pictures with the United Nations gear. It's interesting because when we were there, you guys all heard about the food kitchen staff that were hit. It's an international organization that distributes a lot of the food, and they were able to get in a lot of convoys for food distribution, stuff like that. So they had a convoy just like this. They had 3 fortified cars with clearly marked on the ceiling their logos in big letters, and they were attacked from the air, and their staff were killed. And this happened when we were there. So there's the sense of little security in traveling to the United Nations, but if they want to target somebody, they still do. Alhamdulillah, we were targeted. One of the things about the people, Palestinian people, is that their generosity is overwhelming. So we show up in the north in a hospital that's partially destroyed and completely depleted of supplies and space and everything. Yet they give us the almost prime location in the hospital for us to use as a living compartment.
So this is when we come in, you got a little hallway.
So we get this little, not an apartment, but it's a designed to be doctor's residence. So it has a bathroom, a little kitchenette, and then two rooms. And the window is missing, if you notice. And then you look outside the window, and you see the destruction all around the hospital. Looking one side, just all destroyed building, and the camera will swing the other side. And you can see that people are trying to use partially destroyed buildings, so there's nowhere to go. So I mean, it's all destroyed. So they're trying to use the partially destroyed buildings and still live in them. And then the rest of our living quarters. The water supply is becoming a huge problem in northern, and in Gaza in general, but in the north in particular. Have a question?
Me? What do you do while you're sleeping?
What do we do while we're sleeping?
So when you're sleeping, you're obviously really worried so you don't get bombed.
So that's a very good question. So how is sleeping there when we're worried about being bombed? So my very first night in Gaza was probably the worst one. The Israelis have drones that are operating 24/7, and they make this humming, buzzing sound. They sound, and it's a constant. And then at night, when the sound dies down a little bit, then they become very prominent. Then you could hear this. And then intermittently throughout this, they fire. So the very first night was actually the scariest night because you get used to this humming sensation, you start falling asleep, and then the firing sound happened, and it startles you. And it was pretty scary. But then by the next night, you're exhausted enough that you just kind of fall asleep and you sleep through it. The local Palestinian called these drones the nana because of the sound that it makes. So this video is this was Ramadan, and this was right after sunset, and we had a bomb go off close by, and you could see the smoke in the air from the bomb, from the rubble. The water problem in Gaza, so Gaza doesn't have a public water utility system because of the Israeli restrictions. but it is rich on well water. So the way they build is that every neighborhood builds a well, and the wells are deep enough that they need power to pump the water up. So they usually use solar power. So every neighborhood would have a house that has the solar power and the pump, and it would pump up the well water, and then that well water distributes to the neighboring houses, and so on and so forth. Depending on where you are, the number of wells may be more or less. So one of the very first things that the Israelis did at the beginning of the war is they targeted all the power for these wells. So all these solar power, any house that was hosting the wells were hit first. And that created a huge shortage of clean water. So now what you find in Gaza all over the place is wherever there seems to be a running well, whether it's a hose coming out of a ruined building, whether it's a well that's still functioning, there are very few, but some of them are. Some of them are neighboring to the hospitals because the hospital wells still have power, so they're still able to pump water. So you find people searching for water or collecting water in various locations looking like this, just the hose and the random ruins with water. And because of the sewage contamination, we don't really know if this water is still clean or not, but it's what's available. And then they try to distribute water with these trucks. So if there is a functioning well somewhere, they load up these trucks and then go to the areas that are heavily populated and try to distribute water. In the north, they haven't left any public service building standing. So no schools are still not hit, no mosques. So this is a ruin of a mosque. This actually is what used to be the power generator for the hospital. It got hit early in the war. This is a evacuation of a corpse from the hospital. So the family's taking their dead body on a makeshift cart. Food shortage is another problem. The entire population in the north is suffering from food shortage. So even who used to be the privilege of the population, the wealthier, the people who have homes and land, they have all lost a lot of weight. You talk to the medical staff in the hospital, and they tell you we lost somewhere between 30 and 50 kilograms of weight. That's almost 100 pounds of weight that they lost on average. One of the retired surgeons, he's had a good sense of humor. So he was actually in his 70s, and he was coming in just to visit when we were there, and they were telling me how he used to be pretty obese before the war, and he does this with his pants. Like see how my pants look, and then he looks like he's swimming inside his pants from the weight loss. Children is a problem. Children have completely regressed from their growth. So you get 12, 13-year-olds that look like they're 6 and 7-year-olds, and then you get the 6 and 7-year-olds who are not walking or not talking because of calorie deprivation. So one of the things that we saw there is this soup kitchens. They, in the middle of the street, try to boil soup. There is really no nutritional element in the soup. It's just water, spices, dry lemons, leaves that are used for spicing and flavor. So they're making flavored water and putting it into little containers and distributing it for food. And it's not really caloric rich food at all. It's just something that they can do. This is the charging station. So they collect the batteries from all the damaged cars. They try to save some of the solar panels, charge the batteries from the solar panels, and then make these charging stations. You can see a bunch of phones there being charged in the charging station. The makeshift markets, these used to be streets full of shops and restaurants and street places, and I've actually seen these places before the war, so it was very heartbreaking. And now it's just kind of makeshift market to whatever people can find and sell. This area here was a big store. It belongs to a very wealthy family. They sell appliances, and that store actually survived about 5 months of war, and it was hit when we were there, the week we were there. And the Israelis are systematically targeting anything that's still operational. So the drones survey it in the morning, and then at night the missile strikes hit whatever is still functioning. You were asking me about the UNRWA earlier. This is the UNRWA building in Jabalia that was hit, and this is the UNRWA school in Jabalia that was also hit. This is the cemetery that was saying was also targeted. So the locals say it doesn't matter if you're alive or dead, you still get attacked by the Israelis. We'll see a big hole in the ground from the craters that the missiles cause. Inside the hospital, the resilience of the Palestinian people was really the only positive thing that you feel in Gaza. The people there are amazing. SubhanAllah, their level of faith, their level of confidence in Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is unparalleled. So you hear them tell stories, and the way they phrase their stories is amazing. SubhanAllah. So they start their phrase with Alhamdulillah, and then they say, Alhamdulillah, today I was able to bury my parents because they've been under the rubble for 2 weeks. Or they say, Alhamdulillah, I fed my kids today because the last 2 days I couldn't feed them anything. Or Alhamdulillah, Allah chose our family because 4 of our children are dead. They're shuhada. And the list goes on and on about how they praise their suffering. And I was there, and I would struggle with my belief system, with my faith. We'd be praying Taraweeh, and the Imam is making dua and asking Allah for the forgiveness and for the success in the hereafter. And while he's praying, you hear the bombs and the ambulance sirens and everything going on. And for me, it was very, it was a moment of reflection and questioning. Is Allah accepting these dua or not? But they don't have these kind of thoughts. I didn't hear it from any of them. They would always say, Allah has a plan for us. Allah chose us. Allah is testing our faith. We lost everything in this world anyway. We're not going to lose the akhirah. We're going to be among those who are going to be patient. إنما يوفى الصابرون أجرهم بغير حساب. Allah says that the patient people are going to be giving unlimited rewards, and they believe it. They live it. They understand it probably more than we do. When I came back and I was asked to give one of these talks, and I was preparing, I came across a verse in Surah Al-Hajj. ومن الناس من يعبد الله على حرف فإن أصابه خير اطمأن به وإن أصابته فتنة انقلب على وجهه خسر الدنيا والآخرة ذلك هو الخسران المبين. The verse describes the people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on edge. They have doubts in their hearts. So if things are good, if they are hit with good things, then their heart becomes tranquil and they feel tranquility in their hearts. But if Allah tests them with bad things, then they flip and they lose the dunya, they lose this world and the hereafter, and that's the ultimate loss. And I think that lesson from that ayah I learned in Gaza. These people understand that the ultimate loss is not the loss of material things. They all the time. I just got a text the other day from one of the people in Gaza, and he says, we were actually doing very well throughout this war. And then today I got the news from my dad that our house has been targeted. I was telling you the Israeli survey with the drones and target anything that's still standing. So his house got targeted and it was destroyed. And he said, you know what, I told my parent, it doesn't matter because if we're well, we're gonna be able to rebuild the house as long as we're still okay. Alhamdulillah, don't worry about it. And that level of comfort with their faith is, subhanAllah, a lesson that I learned there, and it's amazing lesson. We were able to visit the Shifa Medical Complex. I think you guys have heard of it. The Shifa Medical Complex is the biggest medical complex in Gaza. It's the oldest medical complex in Gaza, as the Palestinians tell us. It's older than the state of Israel. It went through massive renovation over the last 4 or 5 years. Millions of dollars were spent on it. And then the Israelis targeted repeatedly during this genocide. So every time they would go in, they would hit it from the air, they would surround it, they would evacuate it, spend a couple of weeks making some destruction there, and then move out. The Palestinians would reopen whatever they can. So after doing that twice, they were still able to open the lab, the MRI, the CAT scan, a few operating rooms, a place in a ward. They were able to make it, partially functional. So the third time around, as we were there, the Israelis wanted to make sure that it would never function again, and they completely destroyed it inside and out, and there was mass graves everywhere. And we were able to go see it, and you'll see some of the videos there.
On those buildings.
This used to be a vibrant hospital serving somewhere between 10 and 12,000 people every day. Their emergency room would see 10 to 12,000 people every day. They didn't just destroy it from the outside, they actually completely bombarded the inside. So you walk inside and this is what it looks like inside the hospital, because they're gonna make sure it's never gonna be able to rehabilitate. We were running across supplies, these were medical records on the ground. These were patients' IDs that people were collecting and putting in one place. Hard to tell what happened to these people. Just, subhanAllah, complete genocide.
So we're now entering the emergency department building. This had normally 60+ bed ER, but could flex up to over 130 patients to accommodate and mass casualty incidents and overflow and times of busyness. And so you come here, and to the right would be more critical patients would be here, and then somewhat stable patients here, and then like procedures and whatnot would be further down this way. This is a place people would come for hope. Shifa Hospital means healing. Right, Shifa means healing. They would come here for healing and hope. This has now been rendered completely destroyed, as you can see.
When the when the Israelis withdrew and the Palestinian people started going back, they would find bodies on the ground, and they would just make these little cover over these, so any little hill on the ground was actually a grave.
So as we're walking through the grounds, surrounded by the burned out buildings, we're seeing these mounds. We don't realize that these are graves. People literally just buried here. Some of the pictures you guys are seeing on social media, the horrific images of bodies and pieces. These may be the graves for some of them.
Going back south, we go through the same process as going up north with the border checks and everything. This time around, our convoy met with another UN team that was exiting, so there was just more cars, and we had a truck with the convoy and everything. So when they saw a dead body on the ground, they actually retrieved it and took it back to the south for burial. So this is loading of a corpse on our convoy truck that was found right next to that checkpoint that was there. So one of our colleagues, we were in different cars, they split up in different cars. One of our colleagues, their driver and their UN security personnel was almost like getting worried about the extra stop that he wasn't aware that was cleared or not. And he kept radioing everybody else, are we cleared to do the stop? Do we have permission to do the stop? Because he's worried if it's not cleared and we don't have permission, then we will be targeted as well. So they were a little bit more intense. In the car I was with the lead person, so he seemed to know that we were okay, cleared, and he wasn't that fearful. So it just depends on which car it is. The vibe was different. But the point is even the UN staff are worried that an unauthorized stop would just lead that we were going to be hit by a missile anytime soon. As we were saying earlier, that every single mosque in the north was destroyed, so people would still pray wherever they can. Subhanallah, and when I was in Egypt last time, one of the things that I noticed is that the masajid are not being full. So, I remember when I was younger in Egypt, I'd go even to Jum'ah prayer, and there's nowhere in the masjid, and people are outside and stuff like that, and that wasn't the case this time around. But in Gaza, subhanAllah, the prayer wasn't a question. We would be in the operating room, and the adhan would happen, and I would immediately be asked by my colleagues, I'm an anesthesiologist, do you want to go pray first and I'll stay here with the patient, or should I go and while you stay and we'll make turns? And then you would see them praying anywhere in the hospital in front of the damaged mosque. I think there's another picture. And this video, we'll try to get, but they were praying Tarawih inside the hallway of the hospital.
ممكن تفتح مجال السؤال والجواب حتى.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
I want to ask you, have you heard with contacting the people to any kind of resentment to the resistance?
So in any population, you're going to find different political opinions. So you do hear people who were saying, and depending on where they are in life, we were actually fine, and life was okay. And yes, we had our problems, but we weren't fearful of being homeless and starving and things of that sort. So it's a lot worse now. So why would you get into this? You'd find people who say, if you poke at the bear, they're going to go after you. So why poke at the bear? You get these analysis. That one of the docs was saying. So if I'm a bully, I'm going to come and intimidate you. So I'm going to poke you around and see what your action is. I'm going to poke you the second time around until you get fed up with me. So now you want to fight me, you punch me, and that's when I take the excuse to totally kill you. So there's all these different views, but I think the mass vast majority of people who I talk to among the medical staff, I mean, the people you talk with on a social level, right? Were saying that, they were gonna do this anyway. They were waiting for an excuse. It doesn't matter what we did or we didn't do. If they fight us and we don't fight back, what's there to do? Just wait until it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. What are your options? You're under an occupation force. They're blockading you. They're preventing you from getting your supplies. They're preventing you from building infrastructure. What are you gonna do? You live like this or you fight, right? Some of them say, well, we've fought before. We've never anticipated that our neighbors are gonna be that bad. They didn't think they would be sold out by the neighbors the way it happened. I think the resentment that I've heard over and over again is not from Hamas, it's from Egypt. How can the Egyptians let this happen? How can the Egyptians close the borders? Not necessarily for people to go out, but for stuff to come in. I think that was the biggest resentment that I've heard. And they say we understand you're Egyptian. I was like, no, I think the Egyptian government is worse than the Israeli government. So go for it. Don't worry.
And knowing what happened in 2012, it was President Morsi. He opened the crossing 24 hours. He allowed 75 members of the parliament. His Prime Minister, Hisham Kandil, entered Gaza. Compared to 2008, 2009, it was Mubarak. And he allowed almost the crossing to be open, and he didn't take strong side on behalf of the Palestinians, but the crossing were open, the tunnels were open. He looked the other way. But in 2014, when Sisi was, what happened? At 50 days of killing and destruction. Now it's even, he's not only staying on the north side, but he's taking side. He's supporting the Israeli government.
But he's been all along. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise. He evacuated the Egyptian Rafah town and completely destroyed the buildings, got rid of the tunnels, he flooded the tunnel. So it shouldn't have been a surprise that he's going to sell out.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they saw a big sellout from everybody else, from the Saudis, from the Emiratis, from the Jordanians. They didn't see this entire sellout happening. And obviously you're getting people's opinions, but they say, well, we've went through Israeli military attacks in the past, and they intimidate us. We send a few rockets, they come back and bombard us, and then the international community steps in, and it's life before this time around. But this level of destruction is unparalleled, and And anybody have any questions, just kind of interrupt me at any time.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in the journey from the south to the north, they had like a checkpoint. Israeli checkpoint. When was that checkpoint built, essentially?
When was it built?
Yeah, like how was there a checkpoint in the middle of Gaza?
So what the Israelis did is, after they did the ground invasion very early in the war, is they made this. There was a road, but they elaborated on it. They made this path so Gaza goes north south and then a little bit east west, right? So south is Egypt, north is still Israel, but then further north would be Lebanon, and then which way is it? The sea is one way, and then the Israeli border is the other way. So you have three main roads going north-south, one closer to the Israeli border, one in the middle, and one on the coastal line. And then you have a few going east-west, depending on where you are, but they're not necessarily big roads. So when the ground invasion happened, the Israelis expanded this east-west road and made it into a big military corridor, and then isolated everything north of that road from everything south of the road, and then pulled checkpoints on those three main, corridors. And they closed two of them. They closed the one closer to the border, they closed the coastal one, and that middle one, they call it Salah ad-Din, is the one that they allow some of the trucks and the aids and the military, not the medical people, to go through this Salahuddin crossing. So the checkpoint is a makeshift hut, like you saw in the picture. It's not really a checkpoint, but the entire area is military. There's heavy equipment, there's drones, there's snipers everywhere. The drones there are unbelievable. They're just hover low, and you see the lights at night. In the daytime, they're hard to see, but you see the lights at night and hear them, and they're constantly monitoring, and they have firing abilities. So anything that moves in these no movement zones is fired on almost immediately.
I guess it's a part of their larger goal to try to split Gaza in half, like the north and south.
I mean, it's hard to tell what their larger goal is, but if you would analyze what they've done before throughout their history, that they've never went into an area and left it. So I think their larger goal is to take over Gaza completely.
Have you come across these field hospitals established by Jordan and Kuwait and even
So we did go to the Emirati one, the Emirati field hospital. So some of them were actually somewhat hospitals beforehand. There were smaller hospitals, and then they just expanded next to them with the tents and everything. And some of them were just ICU and tents. But we did go to the Emirati one. You had a question about it, or just if we went there?
No, I want to see how serious they are, how helpful they are.
So the problem from the medical side is facilities, because you have operating rooms. You were down to almost 12 functioning operating rooms that entire Gaza. So you can imagine the amount of injuries that you have, and that's not counting people who need their appendix taken out and their gallbladder taken out, and medical side of things, but also the massive injuries. And the entire Gaza was functioning on 12 operating rooms. So the facility shortage was a huge problem. So these field hospitals came in and did open some capacity. So yes, they are helpful. Any facility is helpful. So there's also the political aspect of it, because the Emiratis, when they open up a field hospital, everybody thinks it's a safe zone. So then you start having all the displaced community around the hospital. So it creates what people think is a safer zone, if it's around the Emirati or the Saudi, or because they're all the same team, right? Anyway, this is an opinion, so
So I think if we can finish the presentation and then we'll take questions. So that's okay with you.
Yeah. Okay, we're on the last slide almost. This was the Tarawih prayer from the hospital hallway.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا
So Gaza has this system of Quran memorization schools. They're present in they're frequent. You find them everywhere. And when they come to their final test, their graduation from the Quran memorization school, they have to recite the entire Quran in one day in order to get their certificate. So they start after Fajr prayer, and then they have all the teachers and the students, and they do their day of recitation. And whenever the student finishes his entire Quran in that one day, he gets his certificate of memorization. And they say that they graduated, some more than 1,000, somewhere closer to 2,000 every year from these Quran memorization schools. And subhanAllah, even during this genocide, it was still happening. We went visited one of the tents that they had for these final ceremony and their graduation ceremony. And they had the tent there, and they had the teachers, and they had their awards, and it was we were actually leading that day. So it was right after Fajr when we saw them. But subhanAllah, you find everybody there who recites the Quran beautifully. I mean, not necessarily everybody, but this is not a sheikh. This is one of the people who works in the hospital, and he steps up and leads Tarawih, and you hear this beautiful recitation. We would be in the operating room, and the surgeon would get overwhelmed, and he would just start reciting Quran, and he would just burst in this beautiful recitation. SubhanAllah, the amount of spirituality you see in Gaza is amazing. And they continue to be hopeful. So these kids still smile, give us love signs. They give us these souvenirs, the shells that say "From Gaza with love, despite the pain." This was from January, and I think the sunrise picture is the hope that there will be a better day in Gaza, inshallah.
For the ones who cannot do, how can we help?
Yeah, what can we do? وَقُلْ اعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَى اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ وَرَسُولُهُ. You have to find something to do, and that capacity is going to be different from person to person. The reason Israel is able to do this is because they have unconditional support from our government here. So the more vocal we are in convincing our elected officials that this is wrong, there is hope for change. If we look at the civil rights movement here in this country, if we look at the LGBTQ movement here in this country, they were able to force policy change with perseverance and continued activism and having agendas and being funded, and even the Israelis, they're the PAC. So I think we need to learn from these movements to see how do we affect public opinion, how do we change our government policy. Is this going to happen tomorrow? It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to take decades worth of work, but we have to keep at it. One of the problems that we see a lot in the Muslim community is activism fatigue. So if the war stops tomorrow, 6 months from now, nobody's talking about it anymore. Alhamdulillah, the war stopped and we're good. But all the movements that were successful in this country didn't have that. They had to continue at it until they get policy changes. Educating your neighbors, events like this that people come to and then learn something, you spread the word. I mean, you learn something new today and you talk to all your neighbors, all your colleagues at work, spread the word. Eventually, when we have enough people that know the truth, that might change public opinion, that might change the way they vote for people in Congress. It's the work that's not going to be gratifying today. You're not going to see the results of it today. But if we build enough momentum and we keep going, then maybe the next generation will see the result of our work. It's really, every person finding something to do and not picking to do nothing, because a lot of us choose to do nothing. Yes.
You mentioned the girl with the cystic fibrosis who was evacuated. Where was she evacuated to? Egypt or?
We don't know. Yeah, so she was evacuated to from the north to the south, being in a triage hospital until the rest of her evacuation goes, and then all the nonprofit organizations work with different organizations, so they send them to Egypt, Arab world, to the United States, wherever that.
And you said that the evacuations that were allowed dropped off a lot after that case.
When we were there, yeah.
Was there? Yeah. Do you know anything about why that was?
There's no rhyme or reason. So the Israeli policy is a policy of intimidation. So they want to show the world that we're evacuating people, and the United Nations makes a video out of it and circulated on Facebook. But that's one person from thousands that need help. So they play the media game, but really on the ground, their policy is not to evacuate anybody, let them die.
Yes. So you said that is Anwar able to provide any help? Is it active in Gaza?
So UNRWA is a lifeline for Gaza and has been. They employ thousands of local people. There's about 30-40% of the population that rely on UNRWA for food. Their support for schools, for education. UNRWA has been a lifeline in Gaza. Are they perfect? They're not perfect, but they have, through their efforts, there's a lot of sustainability in Gaza. So they've been targeted, their schools have been hit, their depots have been hit, their staff have been arrested, killed and displaced, and like everybody else. So are they still able to function? They're still functioning in the south. In Rafah, they're still functioning. Their funding also has been cut from the United States. So it's been a problem. But whatever they can do is better than nothing, right?
Are there any other organizations that are helping that we can donate to?
Good question. So it's a tricky question. I can't promote any particular organization. There are organizations that had permanent presence in Gaza even before the war. They have permanent office there. Islamic Relief is one of them. Global is a medical community that has one of them. So these are people that already had, establishments there, and they continue to provide and grow. Every other organization, they're trying, so they put depots in Egypt, and they have, their groundwork ready to put things across as soon as they can. A lot of them are successful in passing, trucks here and there. So I don't have a good answer to that, but everybody who can try is trying.
Can I?
Yes.
I want to comment on that UNRWA thing. UNRWA, on the 26th of January, Israel disclosed that 12 members of UNRWA were involved in the October 7 attack. It's allegation. It's not confirmed. The UN froze their contracts immediately, and they went into investigation. Without waiting to the results of the investigation, 16 countries suspended their funding to UNRWA, including the United States, Germany, France, England, Holland, Japan, Australia, Canada, and many others. They stopped. So in a way, in fact, they are participating in the genocide. Right. Because as you said, UNRWA is the lifeline of people in Gaza. 13,000 work for UNRWA. And also Israel took decision to ban UNRWA from functioning. They don't allow them anymore. Lazzarini, the Commissioner General, is banned from entering Gaza because he was vocal, he was talking. He came to the UN General Assembly, he gave a very heart-touching speech about the situation in Gaza. So UNRWA, what the Israeli ambassador said exactly, word for word, UNRWA is part of the problem, it's not part of the solution. And the best thing is to dissolve UNRWA. They're planning to dissolve UNRWA, to dismantle it, because it's the eyewitness for what happened in 1948.
Right, so the Israeli policy is to stop anybody who's helping the Palestinian people, the bottom line. Yes.
So first and foremost, thank you so much for your service and for also giving us a candid view into Gaza. I was wondering if you could speak on the coordination on the ground. I come from a humanitarian aid background, and now that smaller NGOs are able to get in, is there a lack of coordination, or is the effort highly coordinated on the ground? I was in a call with Heal Palestine, and they were mentioning really long lines for the operating rooms. Of course, facilities are, not very available.
So there's different levels of chaos, but it's all chaotic. There's unfortunately not a way to try to coordinate all these things. So what happened is a lot of these organizations anticipated that, it takes time to put the teams together and stuff like that. Anticipated the need, and then started planning teams and started planning resources and all that kind of stuff. By the time these resources actually mobilized and got to Gaza, there were no facilities left. So you end up with overcrowding of the existing facilities. You end up with teams from this organization, this organization, this organization. Now they're more of a burden than they are of help. And that question has come over and over and over again. The main advantage of having people go anyway is that, the medical worker seems to have a pass. You can go in with supplies, with money, with food, so even if I go in and I don't get the chance to help as an anesthesiologist, I still, last time I went, I took a really large amount of money and, supplies and boxes of food and stuff like that. So if I act as a humanitarian worker and not necessarily a doctor, I'm okay with that. I'm one of the few that are able to go in because I am a doctor. So I think that's the sense with people. We're going to go anyway, and if we end up working as medical people, great. If not, that's fine too. But there is definitely the overcrowding in the hospital of international teams. You have 5 operating rooms and you have 7 surgeons. What do? Some people are, waiting, and you try to prioritize. And the use of the operating room in general is also chaos within the chaos, because you have thousands of people waiting. So who goes first? Well, it's not who goes first, because if who goes first, that means the second person has a chance in line. But every day is different depending on how many new injuries come in. Right? So it's definitely chaotic, and people are trying to work with the chaos. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much, Alhamdulillah. I think we all learned a lot from you today. I'm curious from your experience as a doctor and a father, how you are navigating discussions with your children around what you saw, and any advice you have for us who are constantly trying to navigate dialogue with our young ones.
Yeah, our young ones are more resilient than we think they are. We try to shield them a little bit, and we say, well, maybe we should show them this and then show them that. And I think we're more worried about them than their ability to absorb that information. I mean, you have to know your kid, and you have to know what age they are, and when to introduce it. But I think that they understand more than we give them the credit, and they absorb this information. And these are going to be the activists of the future. So, the kids that are raised here have a little bit of advantage over me from understanding the culture and the system and working with it. And if we encourage our kids to learn how to play the game and how to be organized and how to be civic and give them the right tools, at least when they become activists on the right side of the story, not hearing it from the other side of the story, and we're not aware that they're hearing it from the other side of the story, and then their opinion is affected one way or the other without your input, right? So we should all tell our kids the story from our side and prepare them to be the next generation to carry the line. And it's very encouraging to see what's happening in the universities. SubhanAllah, you get these youth that I did not see it coming, that they come, with this much enthusiasm and this much energy. And we should have our kids be prepared to be that next generation of those youth. Yes.
I have 2 questions. The first is, you hear a lot of people saying, like, doctors who go to Gaza, they've never seen anything like it. And I know you've been to several different war zones. So how would you, not that you can compare, but like, how would you say the situation is in comparison? And then my second question is, I know there's a huge conversation about maternal health right now. And I know that obviously there's needs of like bullets and brains. How is that also being addressed?
Yeah, good couple of questions. So how does Gaza compare? So the war injuries is unparalleled. This is nothing that anybody in the medical field has ever seen before. We've had one of our orthopedic surgeons who was saying that I trained in Northwestern University in Chicago and spent my career there. I'm a trauma surgeon. Chicago is not the easiest place from a trauma standpoint, and when we see bullet injuries, we have our trauma day. We can now treat these bullet injuries, and he says in my average month, we would treat 3, 4, 5 gunshot trauma injuries. In a day in Gaza, you have hundreds of gunshot trauma injuries. The severity of the injuries, nobody's ever known how to deal with these things before. So all the reconstructive and plastic surgeons, they sit there in the operating room and they say, okay, this amount of loss of tissue is not something that anybody knows about in the medical literature. You can't go back to Google and say, what did somebody do about this? They have to be just creative in what they do. The other thing is that they're working with limited medical supplies. So we were doing an amputation, and so here an amputation, you have an electric saw. Think of a saw you use at home and cuts through the bone. Or at the knee place, they have these advanced saws that cut through the bone. I mean, being graphic, but sorry. Over there, it was this manual string that you hold from 2 edges, and you go like this, cut through the bone. And while he was doing that, it broke. So now we're in the operating room, and the operating room is valuable because there's long lines of people waiting for the operating room. And we're for an hour and a half trying to figure out how to get another saw. So it's beyond what I'm sorry to you know, but it's beyond what you can describe in words at some given times. You know, it's definitely unprecedented. How does it compare to other places? In other places, there's probably more poverty. There's a lot more poverty you get in Africa. When I went to Uganda, there's deprivation from lack of resources and lack of food and lack of clean water and stuff like that. But it's not compounded by the war injuries. It's not compounded by bombs falling on you all the time. So when you go to these zones, you have a team. You're able to operate on whatever X number of people that were waiting for maybe sometimes for years to get their surgery. But it's not new injuries every day the way it's happening. That's very different. Maternal health is a huge problem. So as you know, the Palestinians like to have kids. So before the war, there was an average about 1,500 deliveries a day in the Gaza. So these people are still delivering somehow, but where and how, and it's just part of the chaos.
Thank you.
Yes.
Two questions. First of all, thank you very much. This is really, really beneficial for all of us. Can you speak to, first question is, can you speak to how people are surviving? I mean, are there markets? Is there food? If we are able to send money, does that help? If we can get into Gaza, that's question one. Question two, I've heard, I think you speak at some point, and maybe it would be beneficial for all of us. Yes, you go in and you treat, but you're treating these people who are suffering from hunger, suffering from lack of antiseptics. What's the success rate of these people that you're treating? You know, you're having to fight infections, and there's not medicine to fight these infections, and lack of clean facilities, etc.
So the entire healthcare system is collapsed. So if a patient goes to the emergency room because they're having a heart attack, so the cath labs are not functioning. What would normally here be resuscitation very quickly. You get some aspirin and some heparin, and whatever it is that you do to do something. Sometimes available in the emergency room, sometimes it's not. So if a patient has a heart attack and goes to the emergency room, their likelihood of dying is a lot higher than people who are reliant on dialysis because of their kidneys. The dialysis machines have all run out of supply. So it's not just the war injuries that's killing people, it's regular medical things. People are going into strokes because they're not taking their blood pressure medicine because they run out of blood pressure medicine. The diabetics are running out of insulin. These are dying. The whole medical system is collapsed. So somebody comes with an injury to the operating room, you do an amputation or you do fixation or whatever it is, and then they go to the whatever place it can be. Maybe it's the tent, maybe it's the ward, maybe it's whatever. They're not getting the right, post care, and people are dying too. So the entire system has collapsed. But from individual little teams, you can give up and say, well, there's no point of treating anybody, or you can keep trying, right? What do you do? What are the choices? And they're still picking and choosing, because you're getting mass casualties, and they say, okay, who do we think will have a better chance of survival to get to the operating room first? You can't get to everybody. So it's just that, different levels of chaos, and yes, the aftercare is causing a lot more deaths as well. The second question is about does money help over there? On a short term, yes, it does. You can still go to the market and buy stuff. On a long term, the more money there is without actual supplies coming in makes it more expensive for everybody. And then those who do have the money get a little bit of an edge, and those who don't suffer more. You're not getting enough for everybody. So it's a double-edged sword. But again, do you not send money because the bigger picture is glim, or do you help whoever you can?
can we help our medical teams? Can we send with them supplies?
Supplies is, the biggest help for the medical team is creating a system in Egypt to have the supplies there, and that's what we're trying to work on, is to work with supply people in Egypt to have things ready. So if I know an anesthesiologist is going, we deliver all the supplies to the hotel in Egypt so that he takes it with him on his way. Because trying to carry things from here, A, is expensive, two, is very hard to do. So that's what we're trying to do. But how do you help medical teams? Just make a list. You had a question?
Oh, yes. So I know that we're currently in the acute emergency phase of this crisis, but as an epidemiologist, part of my brain goes to documentation. Is there any semblance of like an EMR right now? Is there documentation of anything that's going on, or is it very much just
So there is no documentation within the facilities, like they're not, there are paper charts, but what's written in paper charts, very little. The medical teams that the World Health Organization tries to tell them to send back daily reports, what are the number of people they saw, who died, who didn't, what kind of injuries, what the age group, stuff like that. Compliance is very, subjective. There are organizations here that are trying to interview all these people coming back, trying to put some documentation together. But definitely, in a war zone, documentation is a problem. Got a question?
The
Hello?
Yeah.
The frequency of the medical missions. I'm sure that there's so many organizations that are going there. There's a place where you can actually have an idea about a mission going or gathering together before they go. So going back to how you can help team, like I don't know if you mentioned something about your neighbors getting you things to go to Gaza with you, or people bringing you things to take with you to Gaza here. Like, so how would you know about those missions? If there's a way, how you were approach yourself, for example.
Yeah. So I because I've been doing this for a while, I had connections and I called people up and I said, who's going and who's not going. There's a lot of organizations having teams, so it's not a lack of warm bodies, but there is a lack of coordination because of the, it would take a government level coordination to say, I need this specialty, this number of people, I need this here, and the government there obviously has collapsed. How would you know? I don't know. Yes.
So I forgot to say before, thank you so much for your presentation. It's been very enlightening. I have two questions. One about I know we're talking a lot about the physical, but what about the psychological? And the other thing that keeps me up at night are the orphans. So what's the case there with the orphans? I know that Palestinians also have big families, so there's a lot of families that are taking care, but I know some families have been completely wiped out. Is there any kind of infrastructure? I know there is no infrastructure. So is there anything that's kind of taking care of the orphans right now?
It's hard to know. There's a lot of kids in the streets, so there's the sense of the community, so if there's 10 kids in the street and now there are 20, they're being taken care of the same way by the community around them. There is the sense of extended family, so there's always somebody taking care of somebody else, whether it's elderly or kids. You do have complete wipeouts when the Ministry of Health was functioning to a better degree in the beginning of the war. They actually had lists of orphans and widows, and they would put separate tents for them, and they would try to provide them with food and shelter and things of that sort. These efforts are harder and harder to sustain, as the war goes on. And the documentation question is, who counts? There is no count. So from the sense I get now what's happening is mostly the tribal mentality of we take care of each other. So every neighborhood of tents has a tribal leader, and they try to manage food and water and things of that sort to the best of their ability. So there's a sense of tribal taking care of each other going on. And the second question is about the mental health issue. Mental health issue has always been a problem in the Palestinian territories in general. You know, the West Bank is probably not any better because their struggle is different. In Gaza, it used to be that we're not under direct occupation, but we're surrounded and we have the siege and so much forth. But the West Bank has the direct occupation, the trauma from that. So mental health has always been an issue, and things fall back when there's acute injuries. So mental health is always on the back burner, unfortunately. But this was multi-generation trauma. You got these kids that are going to be traumatized and they're going to pass on these traumas to the next generation. This is a multi-generation trauma.
Oh yeah, so obviously you mentioned that the hospitals are overcrowded. There's a lot of people waiting in lines. Unfortunately, not everybody can get medical care due to the capacity. So, how do you? Is there any thought deciding who gets treatment next or who gets a room?
It's chaos within the chaos. So, there's X number of doctors in the emergency room, and people come in and they start eyeballing. Okay, I think this injury has some potential to be survived. I'm going to work on him first, and these other injuries, from my first glance, doesn't think that they're going to survive, so we're not going to do anything, and then filter it down to here's who we can take care of, and then okay, this person needs to go to the operating room now, and then he gets to the operating room, and now the operating room is occupied, so the next person that needs the operating room either doesn't die fast enough or waits until the operating room is available. It's just chaos within the chaos.
Wow.
I want to ask the organizers about time. I'm okay, but I don't know.
One more question. Last question.
Have you spoken to any political representatives about your experience? I know some people coming back from missions do that.
Good question. There is a group of doctors who've been to Gaza on WhatsApp, and those who live in DC have been fairly active, going to their politicians in their DC area, not necessarily. I presented in community colleges and mosques and stuff like that. I haven't been talking to the politicians, but there are groups within the groups that are trying to reach out, but it's all individual efforts. There isn't a coordinated effort. CARE has actually been interviewing a lot of the docs coming back and just making testimonies and then sending them to the Congress. So I guess CARE has been doing a little bit of a coordinated effort, but not a whole lot, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, thank you, Noura. Thank you to your whole family. I just want to make a few announcements before we end. So, Palestine Day on Palestine Way, if you don't know, is May 19. This is a day where we're going to do a big advocacy push, as well as it's really a time for our community to come together and show our pride and our identity. If anyone wants to volunteer for that, we are still accepting volunteers. You can just let us know. If you like today's talk, please do follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We have a May calendar up that will give you a lot of other events that we're having. Tomorrow we're having journalist Heda Sahan, who's done work on Palestine. She'll be presenting on 2 short documentaries and discussing them. Those the event at 11, and it's open to everyone. So if you'd like to come and are available, please do. We are streaming this, and we will be streaming that event as well. We also have other events on May 24. We're having a documentary with someone from Palestine as well, and a lot more coming up in June as well. So please continue to come. I want to give another huge thank you to Dr. Ebeid for all the amazing work you've been doing and for giving us this presentation. It was very informational. Thank you everyone for coming.
جزاك الله خيرا.